Hello and welcome to Lore Diver, the podcast about lore, world building, and alternative takes. This is episode 11 of Series 1, The Peoples of Chult and the Peninsula. I'm your guide, Graham, so let's dive in. So, what is tonight's subject? Firenewts. What are they? Why so much fire? Is water really bad for them? Why do they have giant striders as mounts? Have they ever been available as a player race in D&D? These are all very reasonable questions, some of which will be answered here tonight. So, as usual, we're going to go into the history in the editions. So, let's look at where Firenewts have come from. All right, so we have first edition AD&D, another Fiend Folio arrival. So, something that I'm noticing as I'm going more and more into the Peoples of Chult is that a lot of stuff from the Fiend Folio ended up being transplanted directly into the Forgotten Realms. And this is another example of that happening. So, right away, they're in the Fiend Folio, first edition. There's an immediate link to giant striders as mounts. This is made both in text and in the art. The establishment of their martial and theocratic culture. So basically live in a theocracy. They're strong versus fire, weak versus water. And in this edition, pretty much everything about them is implied that we'll see come up later on. But the seeds are all there. And artistically, they look like sort of pointy lizards. It's actually kind of cool. The art for them is pretty interesting. It's in that sort of like first edition style, but you look at them and you're kind of like, oh, that looks cool. I kind of want to play that, maybe. We'll see what they're like. And that was it for first edition. So that was the end. Second edition, on the other hand, is a new home in the Forgotten Realms. So this is a giant step forward for Firenewts. They appear in the Forgotten Realms appendix of the Monstrous Compendium, where they have a nice description. It gives more or less the same information from first edition with a little bit more embellishment on how they operate and sorts of terrain they like, all that sort of thing. And then they have an ecologies article, which was something they used to do, like monster ecologies, in Dragon Magazine. And in issue number 257, they have an ecologies article. But it's not the kind of ecologies article you might be used to or expecting. And in fact, what happens with it is it does it all through the form of a narrative. It's a short story. It's set in Zakara, so the Al-Qadim setting, which is part of the Forgotten Realms. And the story lays out an ambush scenario, gives a description of their underground living conditions, connects them to Kosuth, the elemental god of fire. They get a unique spell called Lava Splash, which sounds awesome, but isn't as powerful as you'd hope it would be with a name like that. And it really goes into sort of the monstrous aspects of them. They capture this caravan, and they're sort of torturing some, keeping them alive, eating them one by one, and one of them finally manages to escape. And as he's telling, spoilers, as he's telling the story, you discover that he's actually been followed back to this encampment, and the encampment's about to be assaulted by Firenewts. So it's pretty interesting write-up. There's basically footnotes all through it, giving the in-game statistical information and mechanical information for the things that it describes, which is sort of a unique approach, I guess. But it, when you're looking for a lot of more concrete data, it left a little bit to be desired. So, yeah, Dragon 257, worth reading. It's a fun story, but not as good. Let's see here. Quantum Mechanics comment, that is so dark. Yeah, we'll get into their culture in a bit. It gets worse. But anyways, so the nature of their theocracy is expanded, with the priesthood being extremely political, and they basically divide the leadership of the Firenewts into two. There's basically a commander and his buddies who are in charge of planning the raids, distributing gold and all that sort of stuff. And then there are the priests, and the priests are in charge of, worship, making sure that all the eggs hatch properly, and a whole bunch of other stuff. However, the priesthood is also incredibly and unbalancedly powerful in this relationship as they engage in politically and genetically motivated eugenics operations. So basically, if they decide that they're tired of one particular Firenewts, challenging them or questioning them or trying to do things different ways, they'll deliberately say, "Oh yeah, this egg, which will be that Firenewts, is bad. We have to destroy it." Or when it hatches, they'll be like, "Oh yeah, this child is deformed. We can tell. We have to kill it." And they'll like end bloodlines like that. And they'll also do it if they have undesirable traits, which is sort of a random toss-up of what those traits might be. And yeah, it is really, like, it gets really dark really fast. And it even notes that, like, one of the things they'll do to reward people that work well with the priesthood is because they put all their eggs into one place, you never know whose is whose except for them. They'll actually assign, your offspring to you to help raise and make, prepare for life and all that sort of stuff. So it's really weird. We've got, I have it written down here, monster cultural alert. Oh man. So not only is their culture cruel and evil, but they follow, like, inexplicably this whole hunter-gatherer myth again. And this is something that crops up a lot in D&D. And it's, it even makes even less sense with these guys. I mean, they're obligate carnivores. All they eat is meat. And having only like the male part of the population out and hunting just does not make sense. Especially because, yeah, comment there, Firenewts putting all their eggs in one basket. Literally a nonsense issue, because the females are perfectly capable of hunting, perfectly capable of bringing back meat, and they aren't taking care of all the eggs. Like, that's been handed over to the priesthood. So there's literally no reason for anyone to be staying back if they don't have to. So yeah, it just blows my mind that that's the direction that they went with that. And at this point, like, to be perfectly honest, this is more of an indictment of how poorly we teach about pre-modern cultures and societies than anything else. Because if they had better information, if they knew where to look for it, or, were at least briefed on it, maybe we might not see these same things playing out again and again. But as it stands, we do. There's some other odd things about their appearance in this edition. That's they make sure to reinforce that they collect lots of treasure and are marauders, but they never really get into what they do with it. I mean, they talk about how they gather gold up, melt it down, and use it to create an idol to Kosuth, the elemental god of fire, who they all worship. But that's sort of it. And there's only so many times you can do that before, you're no longer have an idol. It's going to be like a vein of gold lancing through the ground or something like that. So, there's something that at least I feel is missing there, like some sort of larger or more expansive, same as larger, world that they're interacting with. Now, in this edition, they're not explicitly tied to Chult yet, nor are they mentioned in the Jungles of Chult book in 2nd edition. They're just linked to hot areas and volcanoes. There's lots of mentions of them in deserts, and volcanoes comes up quite a bit. And it also notes that water is an ingested poison to them and to their giant striders, which sort of further links them with the elemental plane of fire, which I think is pretty cool. Their language is a dialect of Lizardman, linking them in some way to the prime material plane. And their depiction has changed a bit, and they look more Newt-ish, but really awkwardly armored. Like, if you look up the 2nd edition picture of a Firenewt, they look like the most awkward combatant known to man. Like, they're just unbalanced, and like they got little stubby arms and little stubby legs. Like it looks more like a newt, but you feel bad for them trying to fight them. Like, I would feel guilty fighting them, because, if it weren't for the fact that they could breathe fire, which is something they can do, it just would not feel fair to fight them, because they just look so dopey. And that takes us right into 3rd edition. And 3rd edition is awesome. This is like the development and embrace of the Firenewt. They appear in 2 key books in this edition, The Monsters of Faerun and The Serpent Kingdoms, and get a huge expansion to everything. And notably, they're finally offered as a player race with not only are they offered as a player race, but they are also offered with a number of options and storylines narratively in canon to explain why they aren't monstrous like their kin. And it is fantastic. It's a great example of somebody sitting down, writing all this stuff out and being like, cool, so how do people want to play this? How do they play it? How do we give them the tools to develop storylines that aren't just generic, I grew up in an evil civilization and became not evil, and they did it. It's great. So they've already been a part of the Forgotten Realms, but now they finally get a home as well, and a few, in fact. So throughout the highly volcanic Chalton Peninsula, there's an Underdark area known as the Firelands, and that is their more or less undisputed domain. As long as you stay out of the Firelands, you're fine. If you break into it, well, Firenewts are always keen to expand their holdings, and this has happened several times in their history, where they're happy doing their thing, leaving people alone, then all of a sudden some miners somewhere smash their way into their galleries, and once that happens, the Firenewts are like, awesome, well, guess we're expanding into your home now. So that's how that works. Now, in addition to the Peaks of Flame in Chult, they're also placed around the Lake of Steam. They're up in Termish, they're near Neverwinter, and a few other areas that have heavy volcanic activity. This is in addition to their appearances in places like Anarok and deserts. Now, just a side note on the Firelands. The Firelands are worth exploring in their own right and in their own episode, and I may do that because it's awesome. It is not the Underdark that you are used to. It is not the Underdark that anybody is used to. There is a central area to it, and it is a multiple portal nexus to the elemental plane of fire. And the entire ecosystem and threat matrix is different from the regular Underdark. And that is where Firenewts are coming into the world from. So, yeah, like, not only is, Chult a different campaign setting and the Peninsula a different campaign setting area than, say, the Sword Coast or the Heartlands or whatnot, but even the Underdark there is unique and probably very terrifying in ways that even adventurers used to the regular Underdark would find pretty awful. Like, it's full of, like, hellhounds and mephits and stuff like that. And just, like, stuff from the elemental plane of fire. And there's lava tubes all over the place. There's magma lakes. Yeah, it's just a wild time. So, distinct from most of the other Scalykind on Toril, they're not created by the Surrak. And this is gets a little murky here, so bear with me. Now, their origin remains a mystery, but it's clear they have a relation somehow to lizard folk. And this is somewhat internally contradicted when it talks about in the religion section of their entry in the Serpent Kingdoms, where it says they were freed from the world serpent. And now the world serpent, this is sort of the deity of the Surrak and all the Scalykind in the Forgotten Realms. Seth and a number of other deities all split off from the world serpent. It was a giant deity that sort of went to sleep and then shed other deities. And apparently the priests of Kosuth talk about how Kosuth freed them from this. However, this feeds into one of the origin stories that they offer, where the lizard folk entered the Burning Rift, which is that multi-portal area to the elemental plane of fire, and were either altered intentionally or evolved into their current form. And I'm of two minds on that. On one hand, I think it's pretty cool, and it gives them that link to the Surrak, but it also very plainly said, earlier in the same article, they weren't created by the Surrak. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff it runs into lore-wise about Obteo, his dominion, the conflict between the Surrak and later Yuan-Ti, and Obteo and his Quaddles, and later the Chultans. And having them that deep inside of Chult really sort of doesn't make sense if they were part of that whole conflict. So that gets a little squidgy. But moving on, their society is explored a lot more, and for once, the aspects of their evil culture actually kind of make a little bit of sense. On the prime material plane, their potential territory and the resources they need to survive are much more limited than they are, say, in the elemental plane of fire. And so conflict between different groups of them makes sense. The targeting of the other groups' egg clutches makes sense, because if you can destroy their egg clutch and kill all their warriors, you basically make more space for yourselves. So that kind of works. Now, Kossuth isn't exactly noted as a caring deity. Like, he does love the Firenewts. They're more or less his favored race anywhere, as far as I know. Pardon me. But he doesn't actually, like, really guide them too much or too strongly, as he is a neutral deity. He's just sort of like, as long as you're on side, right on. And so his clergy are unlikely to try to rein in that sort of behavior or promote unity. However, one thing that I just sort of get tired of is all monsters are sadists and all monsters are treacherous and stuff like that. And that's sort of in full effect here. And you read it and you're just like, really? Another race that's evil to the bone. They're all treacherous and trying to get one up on each other. And, oh, look, they're sadists as well. Of course they are. They love to torture their food before they eat it. I mean, already, like lizard folk, they're one of these races where, they see anything that's meat as potential food. And so having, being like, oh, they're sadists as well, that doesn't really make sense. It doesn't add anything to it, except for just sort of like trying to make something that's already frightening more frightening in a way that doesn't matter. Now, in a fascinating twist, and this is towards the end of the entry, Firenewts are linked to the human-led Church of Kossuth. And this is something I was not expecting at all when I was doing my research, because generally with monsters like this, and monster folk like this, they're always separate from humanity. They're never integrated or commingled with the traditional player races or anything else like that in ways that aren't conflict. And they did that here. And they initially approached the humans of this church, which is amazing by itself, offering their services as guards because they follow Kossuth. Later, they're fully indoctrinated and integrated into the church, such that every single temple of Kossuth now has at least 100 Firenewts, at least 50 of those mounted on giant striders, as the backbone of their temple defenses. And that's like right out of the book. That is a fighting force that is, just off the charts right away. I mean, you have fire-breathing Firenewts and fire-breathing giant striders as part of your temple's defenses. And they also make up parts of the clergy and leadership of the church, which to me indicates that their culture has now changed because of their exposure to humans and them working with humans for so long. And so I think that's pretty awesome. And on the artistic side, I think that 3rd edition had probably the best looking art for them. It really hit a balance between like lizard, newt, and anthropomorphic monster person in a way that didn't make them look weird, but it didn't make them look, like too human either. It's pretty cool. I'm going to comment here. We need more of that in tabletop art. Yeah, we do. We really do need more of more natural working stuff like the Firenewts during the Church of Kossuth in tabletop RPGs. That would be amazing if we had more of that. Now, 4th edition. This is actually, I know I usually say like 4th edition got a 4th edition, but in this case, the absence is actually unusual. And I'll go into that just very briefly. So 4th edition structure for monsters, with its skirmishers, brutes, soldiers, lurkers, controllers, artillery, all that sort of stuff, is ideal for Firenewts. Like, the Firenewts as presented were already a militaristic group. They had magic users, divine magic users integrated in with them already. They had all the bits and pieces that 4th edition loved to create that little collection of monsters for a dungeon master to build an encounter with and then run that encounter with. But the Firenewts got passed over, so it's a little odd. So yeah, yeah, fourth edition just went some weird directions with that, and it was a real mischance because it would have fit well with the paradigm of that edition. So finally, fifth edition, they're back in the game, sort of. Things are a bit odd. They're listed as being amphibious and able to breathe air and water, but previously water had been an ingested poison, and like a torture test they used to determine like who could be a priest and stuff like that. So like that's pretty, yeah. Don't really know why they would have changed it to that. There's also imagery changes, and the art used really goes for an elemental, like a fire elemental newt sort of look. It's much less appealing to the eye and more monstrous than previous depictions were. So yeah, not really sure what's going on with that. And the final big change was that Imix, the evil elemental prince of fire, is now their god after a fashion, and they're no longer being led by priests of Kosuth, but instead by the warlocks of Imix. And this is a pretty serious departure from previous lore, and very similar to what we saw with Knowles, where Wizards of the Coast just like doubled down on the evil and demonic aspects of Knowles and sort of ignored everything else. And that's where things sort of are right now in terms of their history in the editions. So now within the campaign setting, their history is pretty interesting, and there was only one hard date that was given in the Grand History of the Realms, and the rest of it I extrapolated from descriptions in other material with approximate dates. And so the first date that they have is around minus 14,000 Dale Reckoning. And that's when the Firenewts emerge from the Burning Rift area, which is directly under the flame peaks of Chult, and begin to spread through the region. And they spread fast and apparently unimpeded. So the Coatls saw no reason to attack them, and later neither did the humans that Obteo imported to fight his war for him. So they're just sort of spreading through the area, and that's probably where they would have stayed, except for Serpentes. And that takes us to around minus 300 DR. And that is when the Firenewts encounter the Yuan-Ti Empire of Serpentes, or Serpentes encounters them. And Serpentes immediately hires them as mercenaries. They're like, wow, these guys have like giant striders, they breathe fire, this is perfect. We need cavalry, we need rapid assault, we need ambush stuff. These guys are all about it. And so they bring them on as mercenaries, use them to subjugate the Chultan Peninsula, and to patrol the area. And a bunch of Firenewts go for it. At around 10 DR, we have the collapse of Serpentes, and the Firenewt forces that are there sort of bombshell out. Some go back to Chult, some stick around in the hot areas where Serpentes' empire used to cover, and other ones go further afield. They sort of travel all over the south of Faerun and then push a little further north into warm areas. And wherever they establish themselves, they immediately become a threat to anything that enters or passes near their territory. Like, anything. The next one up is 572 Dale Reckoning, and this was the entry that was in the Grand History of the Realms. And this is the first instance I was able to find of miners digging and then breaking into the Firelands, which is that Underdark area that I mentioned earlier. And yeah, that's what happens. Some Thindalese miners in Samrach break into the Firelands, and ever since, Firenewt marauders and salamanders from the Burning Rift have been plaguing the mines of Selgol. Selgol? Not sure how to pronounce that. But yeah, so Samrach gets a case of Firenewts, thanks to poor mining practices. Good times. The next time, and this was extrapolated from information, is the Time of Trouble. So that's 1358 Dale Reckoning. So Lord Ao, the Overgod, is upset. The Tablets of Fate are missing. Kicks everybody out of, the heavens, hells, wherever they happen to be living. Sends all the gods to Toril, where they take avatars, and says nobody can come home till you bring back those tablets. And Kosuth was never mentioned. as being sent there. So no one knew where he was because he wasn't out playing, up in the same place as everybody else was, the north basically. Well, that's because he was busy. His chosen avatar was a Firenewt blackguard from the Acta tribe named Chasen. And he took over Chasen's body, and as an avatar of Kosuth, led the Acta tribe in a savage war against the Terrafolk. And you may remember that from the Terrafolk episode. In the sky, so he led this war against them in the Sky Lizard Mountains, and for a full year, you had a god avatar leading Firenewts in war against the Terrafolk. And then the time of troubles ended. Kosuth gets zapped back to the elemental plane of fire and leaves Chasen's burnt-out corpse behind. Now, normally, Kosuth wouldn't do anything, but in a rare display of affection towards a favored follower and his previous host as an avatar, he reanimates Chasen. Doesn't bring him back to life, though. Turns him into a death flame, which is apparently a variant of a death knight, and sets him on the path to conquering all the lizard folk, or not lizard folk, all the Firenewts in the area. Which takes us to around 1384 Dale Reckoning. So this is right before the Spell Plague, and that date is more or less a guess. But at this point, Chasen has conquered all the Firenewt tribes within a 100-mile radius of where his tribe was, uniting them under his banner. And in case you're wondering, spatially, how wide that territory he was controlling was, that's over 31,000 square miles, or just over 8,000 square kilometers of terrain and territory that he now controlled, and had brought all the Firenewts under his flag, because instead of wiping them out, as previous ones did, he gave them the option to sign on with him, and he'd spare their eggs and a bunch of their warriors. So he has this giant Firenewt army. They're all hyped up for whatever's going on, but things aren't all roses, though, because he's more or less channeling Kosuth again, or Kosuth, there we go, is directly instructing him or aiding him in some way. So he's not telling anybody what his plans are. And so there's a whole bunch of people who are plotting on him and trying to, get together their own things to try to take over. But he knows who they all are. He has the loyalty of most of the people, the loyalty of the majority of the army, and the loyalty of the majority of the priesthood. So he's not worried. Plus he has his faith in Kosuth, which at this point is, indisputable. It's not a question of, does his god like him? It's pretty clear that he does. And that's where things drop off. At that point, we have the Spell Plague, 4th edition, all that sort of stuff. And the next time we see anything about Firenewts, because there was nothing about them in 4th, is after the time leap up to 1491 Dale Reckoning, which is when Tomb of Annihilation occurs. And I finally have confirmation that's the date, and that's courtesy of Chris Perkins on Twitter, commenting that Dragon Heist and the new books are happening in 1492, and that Tomb of Annihilation and everything prior to that was in 1491. So apparently 1491 was one hell of a year in the Forgotten Realms, because you had the Princes of Elemental Evil, Princes of the Apocalypse happened. Then you had, all that stuff with Tiamat, Storm King's Thunder. So yeah, it was a rough year for the world. But 1491, this is the year that Tomb of Annihilation is happening in, and things changed. Imix, the Prince of Elemental, the Fire Prince of Elemental Evil, has made inroads with Firenewts, and these ones have seized areas around the mouth of the Valley of Lost Honor in Chult, and have conquered the dwarf settlement at Hrakhamar. There we go. And that's sort of that brings us up to date, what's going on. As to the current state of the campaign setting, well, Firenewts are in flux, much like so many other monster folk and beast folk races after the 4th edition debacle in the Forgotten Realms. Their plot lines are absent, their connections to the world are missed where they should be mentioned, like in Princes of the Apocalypse. They would have been a shoo-in for that. And they've been, like Knowles, very much reduced to a simplistic monster just there to attack. which is crazy unfortunate because, had even a modicum of their old lore and narratives being applied to the Tomb of Annihilation or in supplementary works from Wizards, it could have put them into some really awesome positions in the campaign setting, which leads to always the fun part here, which is my take on how things could be done to improve the Firenewts' utility in your campaign setting, beyond simply having them be the creature that you encounter when your players are, scaling a volcano or in a desert or something like that. So first and foremost, I would leave them as a non-Suruk creation and embrace the fire elemental aspects. The elemental planes seem to try to mimic the prime material plane in form and function for things, and is a fantastic explanation for how they're related to lizard folk, but not creations of the Suruk. So in this case, they were something generated or evolved in parallel development with lizard folk elsewhere, because it was a form that was worth having and worked. This melds in perfectly with their origin of emerging from the Burning Rift area, as opposed to being created by the Suruk, because this is when they emerged. This is long after the Suruk had abandoned Toril. So I think that leaving them a non-Suruk creation in this case actually strengthens them, and it's because they can be tied more strongly into the elemental plane of fire. Another thought that I had was to make them scarier in their home environment, fire. Should they be amphibious? Absolutely, but make them amphibious in a fire context. Let's really double down on that. They're amphibious, but they're amphibious in lava and magma, and take no damage, and have it so they don't take damage from non-magical sources of fire. Fire, lava, and so on are basically like water to them. They have no problem with it. Ash, smoke, pyroclastic flow, all that sort of stuff. That's just their normal living conditions. And so, it's really like make them terrifying in that way. Have them hate the rain, and have them refer to it as like the poison sky or something like that, and have Firenewts who are on the surface using like elaborate helmets to sort of keep the water out of their eyes and out of their mouths. And have rain hissing and evaporating when it hits their skin. And, as they had in previous editions, have them find water deeper than a puddle, uncomfortable to cross because of its rapid cooling effects. It is, water is the antithesis of fire. Run with it. Does it cause some problems? Sure. But it also makes the Firenewts a lot more interesting. The next thing that I would suggest, or try at least, will be to develop the Firelands more. Their homeland is an amazing and different take on the Underdark that would make even the most hardened adventurers and Underdark dwellers think twice before exploring it, just because it's so alien compared to the rest of the Underdark, which is already a trip. Arguably, only the Aesir are more organized than the Firenewts, and the Aesir are there as well. So, reading this actually added a new race that I have to research for this series, because I was unaware that Aesirs were present in Chult, but apparently they are. So seeing Firenewts better integrated into their home location, using its resources like hellhounds and so on, and all like the weird fire slugs and snakes and stuff, would be awesome. Maybe have a proper Firenewt kingdom, or a bunch of competing principalities or tribal areas. Could be even better, and add a whole new dynamic to Chult in the region. They could even be having conflicts on multiple fronts, because the Aesir probably aren't fans of them, because they're not fans of anybody. And that'd be even better. Next thing I might try is, bring back sort of the unwanted survivor, or survivor background, which was one of the ones that allowed for players to play Firenewts. So either your character's egg was on the list and then something happened, it got smuggled away, stolen by adventurers or something like that. Maybe you're the last survivor of your tribe. Maybe you rejected everything, but regardless, you're now on the outside trying to make your way through the world. And, bring that back. It's not the best background, but it's one that's reliable, it works, and I mean, D&D is not exactly the subtlest game known to man, so why not? Now, the next one is to expand on the non-evil, non-sadistic, not treacherous Firenewts that joined with the human-led Church of Kossuth. There are literally thousands of them scattered around Faerun and probably Toril in general. Any place you're going to find a Church of Kossuth, you're going to find Firenewts and giant striders. And so, pardon me, sorry. Their culture and practices would be radically different from their kin who stayed back in the Firelands, in Chult, in that set of conditions. And I love the idea of having multiple cultures for not just demi-humans, but monster folk, beast folk, all that sort of thing, because giant monocultures that are like the same across an entire planet are just boring and basic. Like they don't do anything. It just makes everything monotonous. You know, you sort of like lose some of the joy and excitement of things. So yeah, I would definitely develop that aspect of them and get them out there. Because I mean, like, if there's a church of Temple of Kossuth in Waterdeep, that means you're going to see Firenewts there. You're definitely going to see them up by Neverwinter. You're going to see them anywhere where Kossuth has a temple. So that actually like travels all the way across the across Faerun, right to like the eastern edges of it, where Kossuth has actually like appeared in the past because he's got enough worshippers there, and they might even be a thorn in the side of like the Red Wizards of Thay. So something to develop. Another thing that I might do would be to keep the war going between the Acta tribe and the Terrafolk. It's just it adds some dynamic action to the region, gives the Firenewts a more active position in it, and it opens up more role-playing opportunities for the players, which is something that I think is important. And while that's going on, bring back Chasson. I mean, he's a death flame. That's awesome. Like, that is a badass thing to be. And I don't like leaving him out. Like, what is going on with that? There's so many great ways you could develop things with this character. You know, so what if the spell play threw a wrench in his plans? Fire is patient. I mean, like, I live in British Columbia, and when a forest fire burns through, they will watch that area for months, if not years afterwards, because ground fires can just keep going for that long. You know, you have places like Centralia down in the States where they've had that coal line fire going for decades now. So fire can wait, and fire is always ready to flash back up. And in this case, you've got Imix, the evil elemental prince of fire, muscling in on Kossuth's territory, stealing his worshippers, stealing his chosen people. That's exactly the sort of thing that motivates a character like Chasson to just haul ass over his opponents, which would be fantastic. And leads right into my second point, which is the Firenewt Civil War. No one knows why they're fighting. No one knows outside the Firenewts why they're fighting, or why the fighting is so bad, or why huge tracts of jungles, mountains, and the Underdark are now effectively no-go zones as these deadly creatures wage a war of unrestricted annihilation against each other. Okay, on one side, you've got the followers of Kossuth. On the other, the followers of Imix. Both have allies. Okay, Kossuth have brokered deals with the troglodytes and lizard folk, so they're bringing, you know, underground lizard people, the troglodytes, into the fight to help fight things underground. Lizard folk are bringing magic and fighting techniques that they don't have access to into the fight. And then the Imix rebels, they could go with, say, kobolds, which, you know, they're noted as being frequently enslaved by people who want a group to be able to fight their battles for them. Well, there you go. Imix rebels enslave a bunch of kobolds, and then they align with the Terrafolk, who hate Chasson and hate the troglodyte forces, or not troglodyte, sorry, the Firenewt forces they've been fighting for. They had to fight for so long. Okay, it's all anybody can do to avoid these fights. It rearranges like the safe travel areas on the Jungles of Chult map, and just gives so many more options to the players in game to take action for, against, or what have you with what's happening. So yeah, like this is it. Like I love that idea. And my final idea with these guys as an alternative take on them, or other things to do, is to do a Princes of the Apocalypse crossover. So I haven't gotten into sort of the other campaigns that have come out yet, and I am planning to do in-depth reviews of them. However, the Princes of the Apocalypse fits amazingly well with the lore of the Firenewts, in the sense that the Church of Kossuth don't like Imix, they don't like the other elements, and they don't like the world being destroyed by idiots. Okay, so there's the cult of Eternal Flame, or Imix's imbeciles, as the Church of Kossuth refers to them, and the rest of the elemental cults are causing trouble, and so the Church of Kossuth is actively investigating it and seeking to crush them before they can screw everything up. Okay? Kossuth hates all the other elements and has no time for the elemental princes, and this is a great chance to introduce the other Firenewts, like the not evil ones, to the party and to your game, to add some nuance and add some difference and variety to things, and just to have a monster race that's not that aren't made up of self-destructive lunatics. And this could either take the form of NPC assistants in the game, so you could whip up some NPCs based on Firenewts and the Church of Kossuth, or you could even do a themed game where the characters are members of the Church of Kossuth who are engaged in these investigations, doing all of these battles and stuff like that. So that would be a themed campaign. And yeah, that is my take on just a handful of things you could do with the Firenewts in order to make better use of them in your campaign setting, in your campaigns. So what is the next episode? Well, people have asked on Twitter and on YouTube, and so it's coming. Turtles. Next week, I will be talking about these popular turtle, tortoise, beast folk, and the crazy path that has led them to showing up in both the Tomb of Annihilation and the Forgotten Realms at all, because they are not native to this campaign setting in any way, shape, or form. So, thank you very much for listening. This has been Lord Diver, a POCGamer podcast. If you liked what you heard, please like and subscribe. And if you'd like to see more, head over to my blog, POCGamer.com, and check out POCGamer on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook if you're looking for that social media action. And if you want to support the stream, if you want to support this podcast, there's links to my coffee and my blog and on all my social media. And I have a Patreon running right now where at the base level, which is the $5 drop-in player level, you get a cool Hexcrawl micro map every month with a bunch of random tables, supports a whole bunch of different games, D&D, Basic Fantasy, a whole bunch of other ones, and is great for just sort of filling in those blanks when you didn't have anything really planned yet. So, music was provided by purple-planet.com. Thanks for listening, and have a great day.